I never imagined I'd be telling a story like this, but here we are. Maybe it's because I need to make sense of what happened, or because I can't carry it alone anymore. Whatever the reason, it has to start somewhere, so why not now? A few months ago, I thought my life was exactly where I wanted it to be. Married to Sarah, the woman I'd met in college, 8 years into a relationship that felt like it would never end. We had a house, a dog, a steady routine. The kind of life you dream about. But like most things, it all changed slowly, and I didn't notice the cracks at first. Now, I can look back and trace it all to one moment. The kitchen renovation. It started with a simple idea. We needed to redo the kitchen. Nothing major, just new counters, new cabinets, something modern. I agreed because it seemed like the right thing to do, even if it wasn't my first priority. We hired Mark, a local contractor. At first, I wasn't too sure about him. He was a stranger in our house, but he seemed professional enough, and Sarah liked him. So I figured, why not? The first few days went smoothly. The house was a mess with dust and construction tools everywhere, but that was to be expected. I was busy at work and Sarah was home during the day while Mark and his crew worked. It seemed like nothing out of the ordinary, until one evening when I got home early. The scene I walked into was unexpected. Sarah was sitting in the living room, but Mark was there too. They were laughing together, talking easily, sharing a drink. They looked so comfortable with each other, so at ease. It wasn't like the usual friendly contractor-client relationship. There was something more, something in the way they shared glances. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I felt an uneasy knot form in my stomach. Over the next few days, the small signs became harder to ignore. Sarah's phone buzzing at strange times, her sudden silence when I walked into the room, a change in how she acted around me. I told myself it was nothing. She was just stressed with the renovation. But when I saw them together again, my heart sank. Mark and Sarah stood too close, their body language too familiar. There was something in the way she smiled at him, something I hadn't seen in months between us. And that's when I realized something was happening. But I had no idea just how deep it went. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but I wasn't ready to face it. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Sarah was just stressed with the renovation. I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. One evening, I came home to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, thumbing through a magazine. Mark was still there, packing up his tools. I hadn't expected him to still be here, and the sight of him lingering made me uneasy. Usually, he'd be gone by now. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I stepped inside. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She gave me a distracted nod and kept flipping through the magazine, avoiding my gaze. Mark seemed to pick up on the tension and started gathering his things quickly. There was an unspoken discomfort in the room that I couldn't ignore. "Well, I'll see you tomorrow," Mark said, breaking the silence. "Yeah, take care," I muttered, my tone sharp despite myself. As soon as he left, I turned to Sarah, unable to stop myself. "So, how's it been with him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "The project, I mean." She shrugged, seemingly indifferent. "It's fine. He's a perfectionist, but nothing I can't handle." "Right, a perfectionist," I repeated, my voice colder than I intended. "You two seem to be getting along pretty well." Her face stiffened, and she looked at me as if she didn't quite understand. What's that supposed to mean? I wanted to take the question back, to pretend I hadn't noticed anything. But it was too late. "I don't know, Sarah. Just feels like you're getting a little too comfortable with him." For a second, there was a strange shift in her expression, something almost defensive. She quickly brushed it off, though, and gave me a forced smile. "You're imagining things." I told myself to let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. The late nights, the quiet secrecy, the way she avoided my eyes more often than not, it all felt wrong. But maybe it was just me. A few days later, I found the text. It was on her phone, left unlocked on the coffee table. I hadn't meant to look, but I couldn't resist. I glanced at it, and my breath caught. "Can't wait to see you tonight," the message from Mark read. "Been thinking about you all day." My heart sank. My hand shook as I put the phone back down. It wasn't an explicit confession, but it didn't need to be. The familiarity, the intimacy, it was clear. And yet, the full truth still eluded me. But I knew now. This wasn't just a little flirtation. This was something much deeper. I couldn't pretend anymore. The text was the confirmation I had been dreading, but at the same time, needed to see. It wasn't just my paranoia talking. Something was happening between Sarah and Mark. I'd never been the type to jump to conclusions without evidence, but now I had it. And it wasn't just a hunch. It was right there, in black and white. But what was I supposed to do now? I couldn't just go up to her and accuse her. No, I needed to know for sure. I needed to hear it from her lips, not just stumble across some half-hidden text messages. I wasn't going to make the mistake of letting my anger control me. At least, not yet. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sarah was already asleep beside me, her breathing steady and even. I should have been able to sleep, too. After all, what was I supposed to do now? Confront her? Demand answers? But I couldn't do that. Not yet. It didn't feel right. So I waited. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept my distance, acting like everything was normal. I even tried to be affectionate, but every time I touched her, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she had been doing the same with Mark. The thought made me sick. Mark continued to come around, his presence in our house no longer a minor inconvenience, but a constant reminder of what was going on. I'd see him in the mornings, catching him just before he left for the day, and every time, I felt this gnawing anger in my stomach. Was he playing me? Was he in on this, knowing I had no idea? Or was he just the convenient part of a much larger lie Sarah had been building? One evening, when Sarah was working late and Mark was nowhere in sight, I decided to take another step. I found the courage to check her phone again, feeling like a complete stranger to myself. I hated doing it, but I needed to know. This time, there was more. Another message from Mark. Can't stop thinking about you. I want to hold you tonight. The words hit like a punch to the gut. There was no denying it anymore. She wasn't just being friendly. She was in it, fully committed. This was an affair. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. I could feel the betrayal, but more than that, I felt a strange mix of numbness and anger. I had given her everything. Built this life, this house, this future. And she was throwing it all away for him. The truth was in front of me. I could feel the confrontation coming, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. But it was inevitable now. Something had to give. And I wasn't going to let this go any longer. The waiting was killing me. Every day, every hour, I could feel the tension building, like a time bomb waiting to explode. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep smiling through the lies. It was only a matter of time before the truth came out, and it was either going to be on my terms or hers. I decided it was time. That evening, when Sarah came home, I could tell something was off. She was quieter than usual, almost like she was waiting for something. She avoided my gaze, like she had something to hide. I could feel it in the air between us. Everything was charged with unspoken words. Hey, how was your day? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. But I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't a casual conversation anymore. This was it. She looked at me, a bit startled, like she hadn't expected me to ask. It was fine. Busy. You know how it is. I nodded, but I wasn't buying it. The way she spoke, the way she kept her distance, it all felt so rehearsed. She was acting like nothing had changed, like I didn't know what was going on. I didn't want to do it this way. I didn't want to accuse her without hearing the truth from her. But I couldn't keep lying to myself. Sarah, I found the messages, I said, my voice steady but the words cutting through the air like a knife. Her face froze, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, slowly, her eyes dropped to the floor. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. She didn't have to say anything. I already knew. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stood there, not knowing what to feel. Anger, hurt, disbelief. How long, Sarah? I asked, my voice barely a whisper of its own. She hesitated, her shoulders slumping. A few months, she finally admitted, her voice small. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. A few months, I repeated, the weight of the words sinking in. I felt numb, like I was listening to someone else's story. This wasn't supposed to be my life. My marriage wasn't supposed to look like this. I took a step back, trying to process everything. I gave you everything, Sarah. This life, this house. I trusted you. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't reach for me. I'm sorry, she said, the words hollow, empty. I shook my head, unable to look at her. The betrayal felt like it was eating me alive. Sorry doesn't fix this. She started to speak again, but I couldn't hear it anymore. It was all too much. I needed to leave. I needed space. But before I could say another word, she spoke again, and this time her voice cracked. Mark, he's not just some guy. He's different. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I cut her off. I don't want to hear it. I can't. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, tears falling silently down her face. The door slammed behind me, and the weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. My marriage was over. I spent the next few days in a fog, moving through my life like I was detached from everything. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel: anger, relief, sorrow, a mix of all of it. The truth was out there now, and yet it still didn't feel real. My whole world had been turned upside down, and I had no idea what the next step was. Sarah tried to talk to me. She called, she texted, left messages asking me to come home, asking for a chance to explain. But I couldn't bring myself to listen. Every time I heard her voice, it was like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. She had betrayed me, and I couldn't figure out how to process that. The silence between us grew heavier. There was no more pretending. She had broken something between us, something that couldn't be fixed with an apology or a conversation. It didn't matter how many times she said she was sorry. I didn't trust her anymore. I stayed at a friend's place for a few days, just to clear my head, but even that didn't feel like enough. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was carrying a weight that I couldn't shake off. Even simple tasks, grabbing groceries, going to the gym, felt foreign. My life had become a series of motions I was going through, trying not to feel the overwhelming sense of loss creeping in. And then there was Mark. I hadn't confronted him, hadn't said a word to him yet. But the thought of him, of the man who had been in my home, in my life, pretending to be just a contractor, made my blood boil. I couldn't escape it. He was part of everything now. He was the face of the betrayal, the man who had crossed a line I never thought anyone would. I was angry at him, at Sarah, at myself. But mostly, I was angry at how easily everything had unraveled. I kept thinking back to the little signs I had missed. The way she smiled at him, the way she would pull away from me when I touched her. There were so many moments I had ignored, and now they all felt like punches to the gut. One afternoon, Sarah showed up at my friend's place. She was standing at the door when I came out to check the mail, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "I need to talk," she said, her voice shaky. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, tell her to leave me alone. Another part of me wanted to hear her out, to understand why, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. But in the end, I didn't let her in. Instead, I looked at her one last time. "You've said enough already, Sarah. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I need space, time to figure this out. But it's over." Her lip trembled, but she didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, then turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy in the silence. And with that, the door closed. The days following Sarah's departure felt like a fog I couldn't escape. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel: relieved, angry, broken. I felt all of it at once, but none of it felt cathartic. The weight of the truth hung over me, suffocating, and I didn't know how to move past it. My entire world had shifted, and I was left to piece together what was left. I kept busy, distracting myself with work. But the emptiness didn't go away. I wasn't good at hiding it, though I tried. My coworkers noticed I wasn't myself, quieter than usual, but I shrugged it off. Just tired, I'd say. They didn't know how deep the tiredness went. I started spending more time with friends, trying to fill the space that Sarah had left. But the nights out, the distractions, didn't fill the void. I drank a little too much on occasion, went through conversations I barely cared about just to escape. But no matter how far I ran, the reality was always there, lurking in the background, waiting for me to face it. Then, there was Mark. He was still working at the house. I tried to avoid the place, but it wasn't possible forever. Each time I thought about him, something twisted inside me. He'd been in my home, in my life, and now he was part of this mess. I couldn't just ignore it. I had to confront him. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't just let it go. So, I drove to the house, feeling a knot form in my stomach as I pulled up. There he was, taking a break outside, looking like nothing had changed. When he saw me, he waved, a casual smile on his face. It made me sick. "Mark," I said, walking toward him. My voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. He looked at me with confusion, and I didn't waste any time. "I know what's been going on," I said flatly. His expression shifted, the surprise flickering across his face before it hardened. Look, man, cut the crap, I interrupted. I don't know how you can stand there and act like nothing's happened. You've been in my house, in my life, and you've crossed a line. I want you to finish this job, and then I don't want to see you again. Stay away from Sarah. Do you understand? Mark didn't say anything for a moment, his gaze dropping to the ground. Then, with a reluctant nod, he muttered, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. I didn't want his apology. It didn't change anything. Just stay away. I turned away without another word, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got into the car, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. The confrontation had been ugly, but necessary. But as I drove away, there was still that hollow feeling in my chest. It wasn't over. It would never be over. And I didn't know if I could ever trust again. After confronting Mark, I thought I might feel some sort of closure, some sense of finality, but all I felt was emptiness. It wasn't relief or anger that lingered. It was this heavy weight that sat in my chest, a void where the pieces of my life used to fit together. It wasn't just Sarah I had lost. It was the trust, the comfort, the belief in something I thought was invincible. And now it felt like everything had crumbled beneath me. The house seemed different without her. Not in a physical sense. Nothing had changed in the layout or the furniture, but everything felt off. The spaces between us were too loud now, the silence too thick. I'd never realized how much of our lives had been built around routine until that routine was gone. The mornings, the shared looks across the kitchen, the simple conversations about nothing. Those small moments were what had held everything together. But now, it was just empty. I spent the next few days wandering through the house like a stranger. The walls seemed to echo with memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. Every corner reminded me of a time before the truth, when I thought we were happy, when I believed in us. But that was gone now. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. Couldn't stop wondering why. What had made her step out of our marriage, out of everything we built together? And Mark, what kind of person was he really? He was just a contractor, a guy doing his job. But now he was tangled up in this mess, an unwelcome part of my life that I couldn't erase. He wasn't the one who had made the vows, though. That was Sarah. I didn't reach out to her. I told myself I wouldn't. The trust was shattered, and I couldn't just rebuild it overnight. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything else that had been swept under the rug. The lies, the things left unsaid, the distance that had been growing between us for months, maybe longer. She had betrayed me in more ways than one, and as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me was relieved to be free of it, even if it didn't feel like freedom yet. But there was another part of me, the part that loved her, that wanted to reach out, to make sense of it all. I couldn't do that, though. Not yet. Not until I could understand why she had done this. And so, I stayed in the house. Alone, surrounded by empty spaces. The silence was deafening, but it was the only thing I could hold on to. It was all I had left. Time blurred together in the weeks that followed. The house felt like a ghost town, even though it was just me now. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Not yet. It was still the place Sarah and I had built together, the place where we'd made plans for the future. But now it felt like an anchor, holding me in a past I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. I was starting to realize that I was living in a limbo. I couldn't move forward because I was still anchored in the past. But I couldn't move backward either. There was no going back to who we had been before everything fell apart. Every time I thought about Sarah, I felt this overwhelming conflict. Part of me wanted to talk to her, to hear her side of the story, to find some explanation, some closure. The other part of me knew that wouldn't change anything. There was no fixing this. The trust was gone. She had crossed a line that I couldn't unsee, and now it was time for me to face reality. It was hard. There were days when I would catch myself thinking about calling her, about asking her to come home, about pretending like everything was okay. But then I'd remember the way she had looked at Mark, the way she had let him into our life. It was like a scar that wouldn't heal, a reminder of everything I couldn't undo. One afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. The cool air was a sharp contrast to the heat inside my chest, where the emotions I couldn't express sat like a fire. I thought about the future, about what I was going to do with myself. This couldn't be it. I couldn't stay stuck in this place forever. I had to make a decision. The moment I came back, I went straight to the guest bedroom and pulled out a box I had stashed in the closet. It was filled with old photos, mementos from our life together. As I sifted through the pictures, the memories hit harder than I expected. The trips we had taken, the dinners we'd shared, the moments that had once felt so secure. It was all slipping through my fingers now, but I had to let it go. I couldn't keep holding on to a past that no longer existed. The past wasn't a place to live. It was a place to learn from, and I needed to move forward. I took a deep breath and set the box down. It wasn't just about letting go of Sarah. It was about letting go of the person I used to be. I was no longer the man who trusted blindly, who believed in love as something that couldn't be broken. I had to redefine who I was in the wake of all of this. The decision was made. It was time to move on, to rebuild my life from the ground up. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But I was done living in the shadow of someone else's betrayal. Now, I had to find a way to rebuild my own future, piece by piece. The hardest part wasn't just moving on from Sarah. It was figuring out who I was without her. The man who had trusted without question, loved without hesitation, and believed in forever had been torn down, and I didn't know how to rebuild him. Every room in the house reminded me of everything I had lost, and even the simplest tasks felt foreign. I was walking through my days on autopilot, unsure of what I was supposed to be doing with myself. I used to be someone who could push through anything. But this wasn't a rough patch I could power through. This was the kind of pain that made everything feel unstable, like the ground I walked on was no longer solid. I needed to find my way out of it, but I didn't know how. So, I started with small steps. I forced myself to go to the gym again, just for a short workout to start. It didn't feel great at first, but after a while, the endorphins helped. It felt like something I could control, something I could do for myself. Then, I began to cook. It was strange at first, something I hadn't done for myself in ages. I'd gotten used to the convenience of having Sarah around, but now I had to fend for myself. It felt like a tiny victory when I actually enjoyed a meal I'd made. It wasn't about the food, it was about taking care of myself. I started reaching out to old friends too. People I hadn't spoken to in months, maybe years. It was awkward at first, but I needed the distraction. I needed to remind myself that there was a life outside of this house, outside of the mess Sarah had left behind. It was small steps, but it was progress. It wasn't perfect. I'd find myself staring at my phone, wondering if Sarah was going to message me, wondering if she was out there living her life while I was stuck in this emotional pit. But slowly, I began to accept that I couldn't keep waiting for answers. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had happened. Then, one evening, a message appeared on my phone. It was from Sarah. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw my phone away, pretend I never saw it, and keep going. The other part, still holding on to the remnants of what we had, wanted to read it, to hear her out. "I'm sorry," it said. "I know I've hurt you. I don't know how we got here, but I miss you. Please talk to me." I sat there, reading those words over and over. I could feel the pull to reply, to give her another chance, but something inside me said I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not until I figured out what my life looked like without her. I put my phone down and leaned back, letting out a slow breath. For the first time, I knew I had to keep moving forward, with or without her. It had been weeks since Sarah's message, and every day felt like a test of my resolve. I kept telling myself I was moving forward, but there were moments when I felt stuck, like a part of me was still tethered to her, to the life we had built. The question kept haunting me. Could I forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? It wasn't just the affair. It was everything that had led up to it. The small lies, the growing distance, the things unsaid. I had always believed that love, real love, could withstand anything. But now, I saw how fragile it was. I had given her everything, and she had walked away from it, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I found myself standing at a crossroads. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to try to fix things, to give her another chance. But I realized something important. It wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. What did I want? Who was I if I kept holding on to a past that couldn't be fixed? I didn't want to be the person who waited forever for something that wasn't coming. I didn't want to live in the shadow of a betrayal that I couldn't forget, no matter how much I wanted to. Every time I thought about the future, all I saw was uncertainty. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to let go. I deleted her message that night, just like I had deleted every other thought of reaching out. It wasn't a grand, dramatic decision. It was quieter than that. It was simply a moment of understanding that I couldn't keep holding on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. The love, the trust, the future we'd planned, they were gone. And no amount of wishing could bring them back. The hardest part of letting go wasn't just walking away from Sarah. It was accepting that sometimes love isn't enough. That no matter how much you want to make it work, some things are broken beyond repair. I had to accept that and start living for me. The next day, I packed up some of Sarah's things and set them aside. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but I couldn't leave them where they had been. It felt like one more small step toward moving on. As I folded her clothes and placed them in a box, I realized that this was the final act of letting go. There was no going back, no what if. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it without her. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. The days after packing up Sarah's things felt strangely peaceful, like I had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for too long. It wasn't an easy peace, but it was real. I was starting to feel the weight of the decision I had made to move forward, and while it wasn't without its challenges, there was a small sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in months. I continued with the small steps I had been taking, going to the gym, meeting friends for coffee, spending more time outside. It wasn't anything dramatic, but it was enough to remind myself that I was still here, still moving forward. Slowly, the hollow feeling inside began to soften. The house still felt empty, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. I was beginning to fill the space with something else, myself. I even started tackling the renovation I had once put off. The kitchen was still half done, and there was a strange satisfaction in finishing what we had started, even if it was just for me now. I'd always liked working with my hands, and the project was a perfect distraction. As I put in the new backsplash and added the final touches, it felt like I was rebuilding not just the house, but myself. One afternoon, I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking a coffee I had just made, something Sarah used to do every morning, when I noticed the phone sitting on the counter. It was the first time in weeks that I had let myself think about her. The urge to check for a message or call her came back for just a moment, but then I remembered what I had already decided. I didn't need to hear from her. I didn't need closure anymore. I didn't need her to complete the story. It was mine now. That thought made me smile, though it wasn't without a tinge of sadness. I couldn't deny the love I had once felt, or the memories we'd built together. But I had to stop living in the past. I had to start creating my own future, one that didn't include her, one that was solely mine. For the first time since all of this began, I felt calm. The storm inside of me had finally settled. It wasn't that I had forgotten or completely moved on. It was that I had learned to live with it. I wasn't the same person I was before, and I wasn't going to pretend to be. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about what lay ahead. It was scary, no doubt. I still didn't know where my life was going, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need answers from the past. I was ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. Weeks passed, and I began to notice something I hadn't expected, a sense of normalcy creeping back into my life. The constant ache, the weight of what had happened, was still there, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. It had lessened, and I was starting to feel more like myself again. I wasn't sure if it was true healing or just learning to live with the pain, but either way, I felt a shift. The house, once full of memories that hurt to be around, was becoming a place of quiet restoration. I spent more time in the kitchen, cooking meals just for me. I'd always wanted to experiment with new dishes, but never had the time. Now, it was more than a necessity. It was a creative outlet. Each dish I prepared, no matter how simple, gave me a small sense of control and satisfaction. I also rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned. Painting had always been something I loved, but it had fallen by the wayside in the years Sarah and I spent building our life together. I cleared out the spare room and set it up as a studio. The first few strokes of paint on the canvas felt like a reclamation of myself. It wasn't about producing something perfect. It was about letting go of the past and creating something new. The biggest change came when I decided to take a solo trip to the mountains. It wasn't far, just a quiet cabin away from the city, but the moment I arrived, something clicked. Being alone in nature wasn't as daunting as I thought. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, freeing. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe deeply without anything weighing me down. That weekend away gave me clarity. I didn't have all the answers, But I knew this. I was moving forward. The future was still unknown, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The weeks that followed my trip to the mountains were filled with a quiet kind of growth. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't perfect, but I could feel myself slowly changing. The weight of the past, while never fully gone, was becoming more of a memory than an anchor. I wasn't the same person I had been when everything fell apart, and that was okay. I started to focus more on the present, instead of constantly looking back. I wasn't waiting for things to magically get better. I was making them better, small step by small step. I found myself saying yes to things I would have turned down before. A dinner with a friend I hadn't seen in years. A weekend bike ride with someone new. I realized how much I had missed in my own life, while I'd been busy focusing on a relationship that had already crumbled. The house, which once felt like a battlefield of memories, was becoming a space I could breathe in again. I rearranged a few things. I painted the walls a color I'd always wanted but never had the nerve to choose. Slowly, I was making it mine again. And it felt good. The house was no longer Sarah's and mine. It was just mine. I also started getting more serious about my future. I had always been good at my job, but I'd been so caught up in personal turmoil that I hadn't thought much about my career in a while. I began looking for new opportunities, ones that would push me out of my comfort zone, ones that would give me a chance to grow and evolve. But the most surprising thing I discovered in this time was my own strength. I had been through hell, and I had come out on the other side. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to thrive. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would still be hard days ahead. But I was ready for whatever came next. And that, for once, was enough. As the days went on, I started to feel a quiet sense of excitement stirring within me, something I hadn't felt in what felt like forever. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect, but I could see a future beginning to take shape. One that didn't involve the shadow of my past. I wasn't clinging to memories anymore, and I wasn't waiting for some grand resolution. I had learned that the path forward didn't have to be defined by anyone but myself. I began to embrace the unknown, and strangely enough, it didn't feel as terrifying as I once thought it would. It was freeing, actually. I didn't have a clear map of where I was headed, but I was okay with that. Life didn't need to be planned out in perfect detail. I could let it unfold naturally. And for once, that felt like enough. I continued pushing myself in small ways, taking on new projects at work, reaching out to more people, and saying yes to opportunities one would have turned down before. I even started dating again, though I kept it casual. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just something to remind myself that life could still be full of new connections and experiences. The people I met weren't Sarah, and they didn't need to be. They were simply reminders that I was still capable of connecting with others, that there was still room in my life for new people and new experiences. I didn't need to find another perfect love. I just needed to rediscover what it meant to enjoy life, to feel the spark of excitement in unexpected places. And as I moved forward, I realized that I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't the guy whose wife had left him for another man. I wasn't the one who had lost everything. I was the guy who had rebuilt himself, piece by piece, and was finally starting to see a life that was truly his own. The future no longer felt like something to fear. It was something to embrace. And in that, I found a new kind of peace. The unknown was still there, but it wasn't something to be afraid of anymore. It was simply a part of life. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it. Months had passed since I made the decision to let go, and looking back now, I could hardly recognize the person I had been. The man who had spent every waking hour consumed by pain, regret, and what-ifs. That person had slowly been replaced by someone who was learning to live again. Someone who was beginning to understand that healing wasn't about rushing back to who I once was. It was about becoming who I was meant to be. I had started new projects, reconnected with old friends, and even traveled to places I had once dreamed of seeing. My life was no longer defined by Sarah or the betrayal. It was mine now. The house was mine, my job was mine, and my future was in my hands. The feelings of emptiness that had once weighed me down now felt more like space to breathe, to grow, and to choose a different direction. I thought about Sarah occasionally, and I wondered how she was doing. But it didn't hurt anymore. She was a chapter in my story, one that I had learned from, but no longer lived in. I had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for my own. Holding on to the anger or the sadness only kept me tethered to a past that couldn't be changed. And now, I was free. One afternoon, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, I looked around at the house that had once felt so foreign and empty. It now felt like home again. Not the home Sarah and I had built together, but one I had shaped for myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I had survived the storm, rebuilt after the wreckage, and in the process, found a version of myself I never knew was there. The future was still uncertain. It always would be. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't fear it. I was ready to take it on, whatever it held. I was no longer looking back. I was moving forward, with or without a map. And that was the most freeing feeling of all. I had come full circle, and I was finally at peace with it.